The Declaration of Independence says that we are bestowed three inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, that's an adaptation of a previous philosophical text. That original is not life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is life, liberty, and property. And I bring that up to say that property rights are the most inalienable in this society. More is done to protect and establish property rights than anything else. And the idea that the protection of property rights is necessary for a fully functioning economy.
The American dream. What do those words bring to mind? For many of us, it's about generational wealth. For others, it's the proverbial home with a white picket fence. Whatever the case may be, when people define the American dream, they generally include some measure of economic freedom. Economic freedom doesn't necessarily mean people don't work. It can also mean that they have enough money to decide whether or not they want to work. If you ask me, economic freedom is what the Founding Fathers meant by the pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence. And, as Bomani Jones says, in America, the pursuit of happiness is inextricably linked with the accumulation and protection of property. Unfortunately, the American dream for Black Americans has been a dream deferred. Let's explore. During the 1930s, owning a home was difficult for any American, regardless of race. The economy, the entire country, was reeling from the stock market crash of 1929. It was as if the Great American Experiment had run headlong into the Great Depression overnight. Beginning in 1933, recognizing that something had to give, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed legislation meant to relieve widespread economic hardship and set the economy on the road to recovery. This package of laws, known as the New Deal, not only helped America get back on its feet, it opened the door for many Americans to become homeowners for the first time. Historians credit the New Deal with creating the modern middle class. Sadly, the way some of those laws were implemented excluded many Black people in practice. For example, while the GI Bill helped white veterans pay for college, buy homes, and establish the foundation for generational economic freedom, many Black veterans were barred by state and local officials from taking advantage of these same opportunities. Again, the American dream is about having economic freedom. And property ownership is key simply because you can do so much with property. You can rent it out, increase its value through renovation. You can flip it, use it as collateral. And if you play your cards right, you can make millions with it. Yet due in part to what Columbia professor Ira Katznelson calls affirmative action for white people, we are currently witnessing the widest Black-white home ownership gap in the past decade. In 2023, only 44% of Black Americans own their homes, compared to 73% of white Americans. These sorts of imbalances don't just happen by chance, they're systemic. And even when Black people are able to break through and successfully purchase a home, they will likely face discrimination if or when they sell, since homes in predominantly Black cities like Atlanta, DC, and New Orleans are undervalued by $50,000 on average when compared to similar homes in predominantly white cities. This undervaluing of homes is a vestige of housing discrimination dating back to the 1930s, when the Homeowners Loan Corporation, or HOLC, created by Congress to expand home ownership opportunities, refused to provide mortgage loans to people who lived in what they called financially undesirable neighborhoods. These neighborhoods were predominantly communities of color, and HOLC drew a red line around them on a city map, a practice that was quickly taken up by private banks. This is where the term redlining comes from, and it's a big part of where the black-white home ownership and wealth gap comes from. In the case for reparations, Ta-Nehisi Coates estimated the loss in generational wealth due to redlining in the city of Chicago alone was around $6 billion. That's billion with a B. Through policies like redlining and the GI Bill, the U.S. government supported housing discrimination for decades. As a matter of fact, the U.S. government did not outlaw housing discrimination until the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which was passed a week after the assassination of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Given the timing, many wonder if the legislation would have become law if not for the assassination and the racial tension that followed. The history of housing discrimination in the U.S. has influenced virtually every American institution, from policing to education. Studies show that racial disparities in health, education, employment, and income in metropolitan areas essentially mirror historical patterns of housing discrimination. In other words, racial disparities caused by redlining in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s persist to this day. Housing discrimination has had a significant impact on education. School funding is tied to local property taxes, meaning that neighborhoods with lower property values often have underfunded schools. This creates a cycle in which children from disadvantaged backgrounds are less likely to receive the quality education they need to break out of poverty. Despite the landmark case, Brown v. Board of Education, which declared educational segregation unconstitutional, Black students today are still more likely to attend under-resourced, segregated schools. Community activists, researchers, and policymakers often debate the best way to address residential and de facto educational segregation. One popular discussion revolves around school choice, where families receive vouchers with a monetary value that they can use to send their kids to the private school that best suits their needs. While this could help individual families in theory, underfunded school communities would ultimately suffer or possibly even collapse under the weight of a voucher system. This is because federal funding follows students, not schools. So if students choose to attend a different school, the federal funding that school would have received leaves with those students. Other options include rezoning school districts, which would open the door for school enrollments to become more diverse, and opening up more magnet schools, which are public schools that offer specific courses and programs to students that apply and enroll. At the end of the day, there is no silver bullet for residential and school segregation, but disrupting and dismantling the discriminatory system that created it is possible. In 1969, the state of Massachusetts passed the Anti-Snob Zoning Act, which paved the way for nearly 60,000 low to moderate income families to own property. Just a few years later, the NAACP sued the town of Mount Laurel, New Jersey, because it had zoning ordinances that illegally excluded low and moderate income families from the right to own property in certain areas. In 1975, the New Jersey Supreme Court ruled in favor of the NAACP in a landmark case, leading to the establishment of the Mount Laurel Doctrine. This doctrine requires municipalities to use their zoning powers to create realistic opportunities for the development of affordable housing for low and moderate income households, and it was subsequently added to the New Jersey State Constitution. So there are definitely examples showing how to turn exclusionary zoning ordinances into inclusionary ones. In addition to changing policies and practices for home ownership, we can also aim to avoid the use of algorithms that discriminate against renters of color, what Princeton professor Ruha Benjamin calls the new Jim Code. For instance, If an algorithm uses credit scores to evaluate potential tenants, it may exclude applicants with lower scores, who are more likely to come from minority and low-income backgrounds. This is because credit scores can be influenced by factors such as historical housing discrimination, redlining, and limited access to affordable credit. Thus, the algorithm unintentionally perpetuates a cycle of discrimination, even though it appears to be neutral. Also, there's Buy Back the Block, an initiative where people of color pool their economic resources to purchase and revitalize property in their communities. This is happening right now in Chicago through the entrepreneurial efforts of Bonita Harrison, Sean Jones, and others. And the Community Asset Transition Fund in Minneapolis has secured $30 million to purchase property and redistribute it in an effort to promote not only the mental and physical health of Black people, but the fiscal health of property in the area as well. That said, dismantling housing discrimination is bigger than just changing policies and practices. It's about changing attitudes and mindsets, righting the historical wrongs of federally sanctioned barriers to economic freedom. Brian Stevenson once said, "The opposite of poverty is not wealth, but justice." At the end of the day, that's the conversation we're trying to have here. How can we engineer a more just society? Some say it's through education. Others say it's through economic freedom and empowerment. Why not both? As individuals, we can educate ourselves about the history and ongoing effects of housing discrimination and use that knowledge to become allies and advocates for change. We must be willing to challenge our preconceptions, confront our biases, and engage in open and honest conversations about race and inequality. It is through these collective efforts that we can begin to dismantle the barriers that have held back generations of Black Americans from achieving the American dream. We must strive to create a society in which everyone, regardless of their race or background, has the opportunity to pursue happiness and achieve their dreams. The road to change may be long and challenging, but we must remember that progress is possible. By taking steps to address housing and education discrimination and working together to create a more just society, we can ensure that the American dream is accessible to all.